Welcome to Royal Education. My name is Mr. O, and today I'm going to be going over how to demystify the admissions process choices or the admissions options. The main reason for this video is that I noticed that a lot of students don't fully understand the options that they have first, and secondly, what does it entail when you decide to choose certain admissions choices. So currently in the United States, there are a certain number of admissions options that are available. One is called the ED, or Early Decision. The second one is called REA, Restricted Early Action. Other acronyms you might have heard is also SCEA, which is Single Choice Early Action. There's Rolling Admissions. And then on top of that, there is the regular admissions process. And be aware that all of these entail different sort of purposes or meanings behind them. And so I want to today demystify or clarify what do each of these mean so that it makes it easier for you to decide what is best for you and how to continue on during your senior year. So when I am talking about this whole admissions process or talking about, these different admissions choices, the important thing you have to understand is what do these each mean. And so I'm going to go one by one explaining what does it mean and then discussing the benefits and the con side of each possible choice. And so today I'm going to start off with the REA or Restricted Early Action. A lot of times the other terminology for this is called the SCEA or the Single Choice Early Action. Both are exactly the same type of admissions process. When you are applying as a SCEA or the REA process, you have to understand that there are some negative aspects about doing this, choice. One being that the deadline is a lot earlier for you compared to other students. And on top of it, that means that you need to make sure that your scores and your essays and everything is done on time by the admissions time, which is usually around either October or November, depending on the university you are interested in. Certain schools offer this option, such as Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and a few other schools that upper tier schools that have it. And I'm going to explain to you what the benefits are to this, and why this program even exists. When it comes to the SCEA or REA, this type of admissions process requirement is that you must apply to only one school early and you are not allowed to apply to other schools, even if they have the EA option. So that means that if you were to apply to, let's say, Harvard University, which has the REA requirement, you are not allowed to apply to another EA school out there. This is an explicit requirement that they have stated in the books, and there are multiple reasons why these admissions processes exist in the first place. So what is SCEA or REA, or why is it that Harvard has this type of program that exists? The reason why schools like Harvard have REA or SCEA is because they want to try to get the best students early on. Many times these competitive students, because they see other schools offer this type of program, end up applying early in hopes that they could get earlier admissions and relieve the stress that they have. Harvard was the first school initially that decided to remove this program because they believed that they were missing out on a lot of low income, lower socioeconomic or lower class students that were performing well and doing well, but were uninformed about this type of program. And so Harvard, in its attempt to try to be more equitable for all students, removed the program. But after a number of years, Harvard realized that they were losing out on a very competitive pool of students and decided to bring it back. And so what are the benefits of this SCEA or REA? The biggest benefit is that it makes it clear to universities like Harvard, Yale, and so on that you are interested in their school, that you are willing to risk amongst all the other schools to focus on their school only in hopes that you could get early admissions. Along with the fact that if, let's say, you do get accepted to the school, REA, SCEA, then you don't have to worry anymore. That means that you could focus on just a few other schools that you may be interested in the regular process, but it means that you don't have as much stress anymore because the decisions usually come out a lot earlier. While normal, if you apply during the regular process, the admissions comes out in around March, April, it will come out by potentially January or even like around January or December, depending on the school and their admissions process. And that's why a lot of students are incentivized to apply, fast. And so that's the significant thing about the REA, SCEA is the particular fact that you do have to apply earlier, and so there's that stress factor that exists. Whether or not it benefits the individual or it helps you or it doesn't help you is another complex factor. There's a lot of facts or information out there that some people say, oh yes, it increases your chances, because if you look at the percentage admissions at these schools like Harvard, Yale, and whatever not, the percentage admissions are significantly higher than the regular process. Yes, that is true, but that being stated, because of situations like Harvard, in which they explicitly state that a lot of the competitive people sometimes do not apply during the early process because they're just not informed or their application is not ready, it's also evident of the fact that that means that technically mostly higher income or socioeconomically well-off people tend to apply early, along with people who have legacy. And thus, that percentile that you see is not always 100% the case, that actually it is easier. It's definitely skewed, it's definitely affected, and in my opinion, it doesn't really change your chance that much when you do the REA or SCEA. But if you prefer to have less stress, then definitely go for it. And so that's my opinion based on the REA, SCEA. Now for me to talk about the EA, the early action process. So the difference between EA versus REA and SCEA is the fact that you can apply early to that school without having any restriction. All the other information that I mentioned about the SCEA and the REA sort of process is the same, that you have to apply earlier, that the chances is, I'm not very certain whether or not it's actually easier for you or not, but for certain that EA has some benefits, because that means that you could apply to potentially multiple schools in the early action process in hopes that it will increase your chances and show that you are interested in that school. And so that's the main key point about the difference between EA versus SCEA/REA. Now to talk to you about the ED, or early decision process. The significant difference between ED compared to what we have talked about, the EA or the general early action process, is that the moment that you get accepted to that school for ED, you have to commit to that school. There's no other option for you. When you apply as the ED, you actually have to sign a contract, and actually your parents also have to sign a contract that explicitly state that you are aware of the choice that you are making when you're doing ED, and it includes a financial aspect of this. And so similarly to the EA or the REA, SCEA, is the fact that you have to apply early. And so that's the big con side of things, because you have to get your application done early, similar deadlines, sometimes the same deadlines depending on schools. And some schools even do this thing called ED1, ED2, which means that you have the option, if let's say the REA doesn't work out, or if let's say your scores are not ready 100% by the ED1 deadline, you can apply in ED2, and there's no significant difference in your chances when it comes to that. That being stated, ED does increase your chances in my opinion, and I'll explain why this is particularly the case. When you do ED, that means that you are committed to that school. You're saying that the moment you get admitted to that school, you are for certain willing to go to that school. And thus schools are incentivized to really choose their students carefully for ED, because this is going to be the body or the cohort that's going to be coming to their class. So definitely it does increase your chances. Does it significantly changes your chances? It's maybe debatable. It's dependent on different people and perspectives. I do think it does benefits, but not to huge amounts. So if you're a type of student who really doesn't hit the marks in anything that the school requires or has an average of, chances are that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for you to get admitted unless you prove yourself in a very different way or a unique way that the admissions officers just can't decline you for that reason. The bigger con side of the ED is not the admissions per se. And the big trade-off is that for you increasing your chances to get into the school, the big downside is that your financial aid will get affected. And why is that? There's a lot of horror stories that you will see on Reddit to different threads here and there, but the main reason is because the moment that you're applying to a school saying that you're guaranteed going to be admitted and you will be going to school no matter what, it takes away the incentive for schools to try to pay you out that money. And so even if you're low income or middle income background and you're financially restricted, schools know that if they admit you, they don't have to try to convince you. They're not trying to compete with other schools at that point. You're basically forced in a sense to go to that school. And so they have no incentive to try to give you a really good financial aid package. And so this is a very big factor that students have to take into account when applying to schools, especially under the ED. If you're financially well off and you're not concerned about money, then perfectly fine. Definitely do ED. But a lot of the students that I work with don't have that option. And so make sure that you are aware of this fact that you do have to pay out quite a bit. And if you are, especially from lower income background, what the school does is that they end up giving you some amount of financial aid, but most of it is going to be in the form of loans, ways like work study and whatever not to cover for the cost. And that means that you will have to pay out in the future. So just be aware of this this negative factor when taking into consideration of ED. Now I'm going to talk about the rolling admissions. This is something that is discussed quite a bit from people because rolling admissions is not a very common admissions process, but there are a number of schools out there such as University of Pacific that do something called rolling admissions process, where they don't give you explicit deadline for their application, but they basically tell you that apply whenever until we run out of space or until we meet the quota as to how many students we're going to be admitting to our cohort. And there's goods and bads to this situation because the benefit is that let's say that you find out a school has rolling admissions and you do apply quite early comparative to the normal deadline of December. So let's say you apply during October. You apply even during September and you were able to finish up all the paperwork, essays, everything and get it all processed. A lot of times you will get your admissions choice done really early on, maybe a month or even 2 months afterwards. You might get admitted and there's a good benefit to that. And on top of that, they're incentivized to give you scholarships and different opportunities because they know that you're really interested in their school even when the deadline wasn't set onto that point. So there's a good benefit about the rolling admissions. The downside is that because there's no deadline, it makes it hard at times to know when to apply, especially for those that are very busy and can't apply that fast. So I know some students that apply December, January, and they have to wait a number of months and they're not given an explicit date as to when they're getting admitted, if they get admitted. And that's the big downside about rolling admissions. But that being stated, once you get admitted, usually their deadline for you to, SIR, or I believe it's committing to that school mainly, is usually around March or April. And so there's that aspect that helps, make rolling admissions be nice, but be aware that you need to apply eventually and you can't wait out too long. Or else what happens is that you lose out of your opportunity to get a spot at the school potentially. Okay? And so that's my main thing about rolling admissions. Now to talk about the regular decision. So most schools and every school, almost basically every school has regular decision option. And some schools only have regular decision option. And so when regular decision option, depending on state schools or if it's a private school, will be on November to December. And the benefit of regular decision is that you have more time. That means you have more time to get scores down, more time to get your essays done, and so on. But the con side of doing the regular decision is that you're competing against everyone else. Because at that point, when you're doing regular decision, there's no restrictions for people to apply to a specific number of schools and so on. It makes it harder at times for you to get admitted to a school, but you do have more options. There's nothing really particular about whether or not you should, do regular or not. My recommendation always is to apply to as many schools as possible, because the more options you have, the more choices you have, and the more choices you have, it doesn't hurt. It never hurts anyone. And so that would be my general spiel about demystifying the admissions process, especially when it comes to the options that you have when you're applying. Please let me know if you have any questions below. Please do subscribe since I'm going to continue making videos like this. And I hope this was very helpful because I understand that a lot of times seniors and high school students get confused. Even I sometimes get confused. And so leave a comment below if there's anything else you have questions-wise so that I could answer them next time. I'll see you next time.